Asterisk, I still remember the moment I turned the key and stepped into my grandfather's weathered cabin at Whispering Pines. A strange blend of excitement and dread stirred inside me. If you're watching this, I'd love to know, where in the world are you joining me from? Drop a comment below, because this story, this place, changed everything. Asterisk. There's something about coming back to a creaky, familiar doorstep that makes you question every life choice you've ever made. The sight of chipped paint and the old rocking chair still swaying gently in the breeze brought back a flood of memories from my childhood summers. Asterisk, I told myself I was here to honor Grandpa Walter's legacy. But truthfully, I was running from the chaos, the burnout, the endless race of modern life. I needed a reset. A quiet place to breathe. Asterisk, the towering pine trees whispered like they remembered me. But in those hushed voices, I sensed not just welcome but warnings. Warnings of things buried deep, secrets, trouble. Asterisk, my name is Alex. And what started as a peaceful return to my family's roots quickly unraveled into a battle I never saw coming. A battle that would grip this entire community. Asterisk, it began with Karen Wilkinson. Her smile was friendly enough. Her welcome, polite. But something in her eyes made it clear my presence disrupted more than just cobwebs and dust. Asterisk, I thought I was reclaiming a family legacy. But I had walked into a powder keg of hidden agendas, land disputes, and power plays. And if I was going to survive this, I needed help. Legal help. Asterisk, enter Jake Thompson. An old college buddy, now a sharp-witted lawyer, who, by some stroke of fate, had recently moved to the county next door. When I called him, his interest piqued instantly. He knew about Whispering Pines. More importantly, he knew about something called the Accord, an old conservation agreement my grandfather helped create. Asterisk, Jake showed up in his dusty pickup, eyes serious, voice steady. We dug into the Accord together, and what we found was staggering: strict rules banning commercial development on protected land, and powerful penalties for violators. Asterisk, if this Accord still held legal weight, the HOA's plans Karen had been quietly pushing could be stopped cold. Asterisk, Jake urged caution. Before we made any noise, he suggested confirming the document's validity with the county clerk. He also encouraged me to track down anyone who might remember the original agreement. Anyone who could fill in the blanks history had forgotten. Asterisk, that's when I remembered Eleanor Fisher. Asterisk, she lived across the lake. Grandpa's old friend. A walking, talking time capsule of this place. Within days, I was at her kitchen table, surrounded by the smell of lemon tea and the soft gaze of faded photographs. Asterisk, Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. She told me the real story, how years ago the families here, led by Grandpa Walter, signed the Accord to protect their land. And the Wilkinsons, they were once its fiercest supporters, until money got in the way. Asterisk, she hinted at betrayal. Backroom deals, bribes, and pages from the Accord, quietly removed from public files. Asterisk, my heart pounded as she described a specific clause, one that could destroy any developer who violated the terms. A clause that might still be binding if we could find the full original document. Asterisk, and then a knock. Karen. She stood on my porch with forms, permits, and a polished smile hiding sharpened teeth. The HOA, she claimed, needed to inspect the cabin for safety. But the moment she stepped inside, I saw this wasn't about safety. It was an audit, a calculated scan for flaws. For leverage. Asterisk, every squeaky floorboard, every exposed beam, every wire was noted. She rattled off concerns like a prosecutor building a case. She didn't say it outright, but her message was clear. Comply or get out. The HOA would bury me in regulations if I stood in her way. But I wasn't leaving. After she left, Jake and I went back to the Accord. That's when we saw a handwritten note in the margins. Grandpa's handwriting. It referenced a storage locker in the next town. Future of Whispering Pines, it read. Asterisk, our hearts racing, we headed there at dawn. The sun hadn't fully risen as we pulled into the abandoned complex. Inside the locker, buried in a dusty trunk, we found it yellowed. Pages signed and sealed by the original community members, including the missing penalty clause. And it was explosive. If any signer or their descendants violated the accord, they'd be banned from developing any land in Whispering Pines for 100 years, asterisk. It was the smoking gun, asterisk, but our celebration didn't last, asterisk. On the way back, we noticed an SUV trailing us. My phone buzzed with unknown calls. When we reached the cabin, the door was busted in. Everything was overturned. The place was ransacked. They knew. Someone wanted those documents. Badly, asterisk. Jake wanted to call the police. We did, but the officer who showed up seemed uninterested. He took notes, nodded a lot, and left. Karen's reach, it seemed, extended deep into the town's power structure. Asterisk. I stared at the wreckage of my grandfather's home, fists clenched. This was no longer just about a cabin. It was about truth, legacy, and fighting the kind of corruption that hides behind manicured lawns and homeowner meetings, asterisk. I still remember the day I tucked those original documents, weathered, yellowed, and powerful, into a lockbox with hidden compartments. Every click of the latch felt like sealing away a piece of history. I took every precaution I could. These, papers weren't just old files, they were the last safeguard of my grandfather's legacy. Word of the break-in spread fast through Whispering Pines. Surprisingly, it wasn't just gossip. Quiet support started trickling in from neighbors who had long resented the iron grip of the HOA, asterisk. People whispered to me in passing at the mailbox on evening walks how tired they were of Karen and Richard's control. But fear kept their voices low. No one wanted to be next on the HOA's hit list. That only made me more determined. This wasn't just about the property anymore. I was fighting for everyone here who had ever felt silenced, manipulated, or bullied into submission. Asterisk. That night I found myself surrounded by old photo albums, snapshots of the lake, the tall pines, and smiling faces from decades ago. Families, now gone or driven away. Grandpa always said Whispering Pines wasn't just a location, it was a trust, a responsibility. As I flipped through each memory, my spine straightened. I knew I had to keep pushing. Because the real fight? It was only just beginning, asterisk. A few days later, I attended an HOA meeting that would change everything. Tension crackled in the air inside the municipal hall, where flickering fluorescent lights only added to the unease. Karen sat at the front, cool and polished. Richard loomed behind her like a silent enforcer. The room was full. Some people were curious, others looked nervous, even afraid, asterisk. When I stepped up to the microphone, I could feel dozens of eyes on me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I spoke about the historical significance of our land, about my grandfather's work and the environmental accord he helped write. Then I showed them the original documents, asterisk. Gasps echoed, murmurs rippled across the room. I pointed out the penalty clauses, clear as day, outlining legal repercussions for any development that violated the environmental safeguards. Karen cut in, trying to dismiss the accord as ancient history, but that's when Jake, our legal advocate, stood up. He backed me with a firm explanation. The accord was still protected under state environmental law, asterisk. Suddenly the room wasn't just murmuring, it was demanding answers. Karen's cool exterior cracked. Richard clenched his jaw, glancing toward her for a signal. The meeting ended in confusion and raised voices, but I walked out with a sense of hard-earned victory. Power had shifted, even if just slightly, asterisk. But Karen? She wasn't done, asterisk. Within days, a wave of flashy brochures started hitting mailboxes. Karen had launched a propaganda campaign, painting herself as the savior of Whispering Pines. According to her, the environmental accord was a forgery. I was a troublemaker trying to block progress, asterisk. The materials featured vibrant images of future developments, modern lakefront cabins, boutique restaurants, spas. It was slick. It was professional, it was manipulative. Buried in fine print were vague references to environmental assessments that didn't line up with the real accord at all, asterisk. My heart sank. But I didn't let despair take root. Instead, I got to work. I designed my own flyer, simple but honest, highlighting what the community stood to lose: the forest, the water, the quiet beauty. I reminded neighbors of the legacy we were meant To protect, meanwhile, whispers became rumors. Karen, it seemed, had been meeting with city officials behind closed doors offering promises of profit and political favor in return for fast-tracking approvals. One night, I came home to find a note under my door. Stay out of this. If you know what's good for you, the intimidation didn't scare me. It ignited something inside me. Jake encouraged me to document everything, every threatening call, every suspicious message. I began recording unknown numbers. Sometimes I heard only silence. Other times, there were threats, mocking comments about clinging to a useless relic. It was ugly, but something else started happening. Two neighbors began to speak up. People I barely knew confided in me about Karen's reign of fear. Forced repainting of houses, insane fines for mailbox designs, and endless HOA surveillance. One family was fined for overwatering, another for planting the wrong kind of flowers. It was absurd and unjust. A few brave souls agreed to testify. They'd seen documents altered. Records quietly changed. Environmental protections removed or edited. Jake and I gathered it all. Witnesses, paperwork, the full history of the accord. We filed for a formal hearing. The court date was set. I knew Karen wouldn't take it lying down. Then, early one morning, I saw them bulldozers and cranes lined up at the lake's edge. A bold sign claimed preliminary clearing had begun for a community recreation park. No permits had been approved. No legal proceedings had concluded. It was a power move, pure and simple. I stormed over with copies of the accord in hand, warning workers that this project was illegal. Most shrugged, saying they were just doing their jobs. Their supervisor smirked. He claimed everything was in order. I took photos of everything: license plates, signs, equipment IDs. Jake assured me he'd file a cease and desist within hours. But the machines kept inching closer to the tree line. I stood helpless as engines roared and blades scraped the earth. It felt like betrayal, that spot by the lake. That's where Grandpa taught me to fish. Taught me patience, balance, honor. Watching it threaten like this broke something in me, but also forged something stronger. That night, word spread fast. By morning, a group of residents, some I'd never even spoken to, gathered at the construction site with homemade signs. Save our pines, no bulldozers on sacred ground. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They were allies. Karen showed up too, flanked by private security. She looked furious but controlled. Her words were sharp. She warned us we'd regret standing in the way of progress. But this time, she wasn't speaking to a silent crowd. People shouted back, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courthouse loomed like a stone fortress. Inside, reporters buzzed around, sensing the drama. Some framed it as an environmental dispute. Others called it a war between a grieving heir and a power-hungry board president. Jake was calm, focused. We had everything lined up. The original accord, documents showing tampering, sworn testimonies from residents, even pictures of the unauthorized construction. Karen walked in with Richard close behind. Their attorney looked like he'd stepped off a TV set, polished, smug, overconfident. They were still betting they could win through influence and spin, but we weren't there to play games. We were there to fight for the truth, Despite the clear violation of long-standing conservation agreements, Karen's attorney launched an aggressive attempt to undermine our evidence. He claimed the documents were suspicious, incomplete, and potentially forged. But then we presented the collection of papers I had unearthed from Grandpa's old storage locker. Every page stamped, signed and sealed by respected notaries and original community leaders. As the judge examined them, the mood in the courtroom shifted. The hum of whispers grew louder, the air crackling with possibility. A forensic expert we'd enlisted took the stand, confirming the authenticity of the documents and their deep-rooted historical connection to the land's original zoning and legal protections. Through it all, Karen remained still, her expression a mask of cold confidence. as though certain that her expensive legal team would dismantle our case without breaking a sweat. But then Jake rose. With calm resolve, he delivered a final blow. He revealed that Karen was the direct descendant of one of the original signatories, a name and signature clearly visible on the document we had just verified. A visible wave passed through the room. Even the judge arched an eyebrow, noting, "The irony." As the first day wrapped up, I walked out of the courtroom completely drained, yet carrying a cautious spark of hope. The following days blurred into each other as we all awaited the court's final session. I sought comfort in quiet walks by the lake, letting the golden shimmer of sunset reflect off the water, drawing strength from memories of simpler times, when Grandpa taught us the names of trees and warned us about greedy people who saw only dollar signs in nature's gifts. During that waiting period, Amanda Peterson, a distant cousin, paid me a surprise visit. She brought with her a folder of old letters she'd found in her attic, written by Grandpa himself. They were impassioned appeals to environmental groups, pleading for preservation of the lake and forest. Though not legal documents, they painted a compelling picture of Grandpa's unwavering commitment to conservation. We spent that evening reading through his words, laughing and tearing up, reminiscing about long-forgotten family barbecues under the pines. Amanda shared her dream of transforming the HOA's cold meeting hall into a shared space for community, learning, a sanctuary for nature education and togetherness. Her words sparked something in me, a vision of what could be if we emerged. Victorious. On the morning of the verdict, I arrived at the courthouse early. In the hallway, Karen whispered urgently with her lawyer, tension etched across her features. Richard paced nearby, his eyes scanning the window nervously, as if expecting salvation from somewhere. His expression betrayed something I hadn't seen before. Fear. When court convened, the judge wasted no time. In a composed, steady tone, he announced that the original conservation accord was fully valid. Every clause, including stiff penalties for violations, still stood. As he detailed how the proposed development directly conflicted with the protected status of the land, I felt my chest tighten with anticipation. Then it came. The permits were invalidated. Construction was to cease immediately, and those who had acted in bad faith would be held accountable. Relief flooded through me as though I had been holding my breath for months. The lakefront project was officially dead. What followed was chaos. Reporters surged forward. Lights flashed, microphones were thrust toward anyone willing to speak. Jake placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his eyes reflecting exhaustion and triumph. Karen tried to hold a press conference, but her confidence wavered. She claimed to have acted in good faith, blaming vague administrative issues for the missteps. Richard stood behind her, hollow-eyed, as if the world he had built had just crumbled. I felt no pity. Their tactics, the threats, the lies, the calculated intimidation had nearly broken this community. Instead of sympathy, I felt pride. Not in myself alone, but in every voice that had dared to resist. Outside, residents surrounded me, offering handshakes and tearful thanks. One elderly woman clutched my hand, telling me her late father had helped draft the original agreement. She said she felt his spirit smiling now that it had been honored. To the crowd and cameras. I found just enough strength to speak. This fight wasn't just about land, I said, voice trembling. It was about legacy. About standing up for what's right, for nature, for our neighbors, and against fear. That night I sat on the porch of Grandpa's cabin, watching the sky turn from orange to indigo, the wind whispering through the trees like an old friend. For the first time in years, peace settled around me like a blanket. The fallout came fast. Investigators uncovered evidence of bribery, backdoor deals, forged documents, and monetary trails that pointed to a broader conspiracy. With public interest surging, local media dug deeper into the Wilkinsons' financial history, revealing large sums funneled through off-book accounts and shadowy contractors. Neighbors, once too afraid to speak, came forward. They described how they were fined or threatened into silence for trivial violations like mailbox colors or lawn height. The HOA board started collapsing from within. One by one, members resigned, unwilling to be associated with the Wilkinsons. Disgrace. It was as though a dam had burst, washing away years of control and fear. I found myself doing interviews, receiving letters from people in other neighborhoods who were inspired to stand up for their rights. The victory was rippling outward. Weeks later, I sat again on that porch, drink in hand, watching the forest settle into dusk. Children's laughter echoed in the distance as volunteers helped replant areas damaged by bulldozers. Saplings replaced broken ground. Life was returning. Amanda and Jake were already knee-deep in the community center project. Amanda's new layout envisioned open spaces, natural lighting, a reading area, and educational exhibits for local wildlife. Jake connected us with grant organizations and green nonprofits. Slowly, the old HOA building, once a symbol of control, was becoming a place of hope. The whispers of change grew louder. Workshops were planned. Guest speakers from conservation groups were lined up. Families signed up to volunteer. People who had once tiptoed around HOA threats now smiled freely, chatting about their gardens, their children, and their dreams. Though. The lawsuits against Karen and Richard continued, with new charges surfacing weekly. Life in Whispering Pines felt different, freer, lighter, better. As for me, I had no illusions that everything would be perfect moving forward, but I knew we had reached a turning point. Grandpa's legacy had not only been protected, it had inspired something new. A community that remembered its roots, fought for its future, and found its voice again, and that voice would never be silenced again. What once stood as a crumbling relic had now transformed into something living, breathing, a real symbol of what hope and perseverance could accomplish. But the road to renewal hadn't been smooth. Karen's shadow still loomed in the form of incomplete permits, depleted accounts, and legal threads we were still unraveling. A few of her diehard supporters clung to the belief that I had sabotaged some grand economic vision. They made no secret of their resentment, scowls, whispers, murmurs about how I had single-handedly doomed Whispering Pines to mediocrity. Their bitterness stung, yes, but I never wavered. I still believed that true progress must honor a place's soul, not exploit it. And fortunately, I wasn't alone. For every sideways glance, there were warm pats on the back, thank you notes in the mailbox, and heartfelt conversations from folks who genuinely understood. Eleanor Fisher was one of them. Every time she stopped by, her eyes sparkled with pride. Your grandpa would be smiling down at all this, she'd say. And I'd feel it too, his presence in every step forward we took. To think it all began with an old, dust-covered contract tucked away in a forgotten storage locker. That document sparked something much greater than a legal argument. It lit a fire, a movement, a revival. One late afternoon, I walked through the forest trail, the wind stirring leaves overhead as sunlight spilled through the branches. The world felt still, sacred almost. In that moment, the gravity of what we had protected settled in. This wasn't just a conservation victory, it was a preservation of memory, of legacy, of everything Whispering Pines stood for. My phone buzzed reminding me of the meeting scheduled with the county officials. We were about to finalize the legal protective status of the land. Yes, bureaucracy still had its place. There were papers to sign, local ordinances to finalize, and yes, more red tape. But the hardest part was over. We had won the heart of the battle. When we officially signed the updated Whispering Pines Accord, it was almost as powerful as the courtroom win. A modest ceremony by the lake marked the occasion. Local leaders, environmental advocates, and everyday residents stood side by side. There was a deep, quiet reverence in the air. People understood this wasn't just about a patch of forest, it was about community, accountability, and honoring the past. As I signed the final page, I felt a wave of emotion rise in my chest. This was the moment Grandpa Walter's dream reached full bloom. Afterwards, What was supposed to be a quiet gathering turned into an impromptu celebration. Pies were passed around, grilled veggies sizzled, and laughter rang out over the lake. Kids skipped stones across the water. Elders told stories of fishing trips, forest hikes, and long-forgotten summer nights. Time felt like it folded in on itself, past, present, and future merging in shared gratitude. Karen and Richard were nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it Richard was already trying to start fresh in another county, trying to outrun the public disgrace. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But mostly I felt relief. Their ambition had nearly steamrolled our sanctuary. Their threats, their lies, it had all come close to rewriting history. But now, the trees still stood, proud and rooted. Whispering a different ending, in the following weeks, change bloomed all around. The old HOA building, once a symbol of tyranny and exclusion, began its transformation. Walls came down, windows opened up. Volunteers poured in with paintbrushes, toolkits, and unmatched energy. People gave what they could: books, shelves, exhibits. Local artists painted murals, each brushstroke telling a chapter of Whispering Pine's story. Amanda naturally took the reins, organizing the renovation with the precision of a seasoned architect. She planned the schedules, oversaw the workshops, even picked the color schemes. I never imagined being a community coordinator, she joked one day, but here we are. Meanwhile, Jake offered free legal clinics once a week, helping residents navigate housing disputes and mortgage confusion with grace and clarity. For me, walking through that space, the same space Karen once ruled with an iron grip, was almost surreal. It no longer felt like her fortress. It was now a space of transparency and unity. One evening, after the volunteers had gone home, I stood alone in the main hall. The new lights cast a warm glow across the fresh paint and open walls. I thought of Grandpa Walter again. A silent thanks escaped my lips. We had done it, not just rebuilt a building, but restored a community spirit. Eleanor invited me over for tea not long after, just a few neighbors, some cookies. Nothing fancy, but it was one of the most heartfelt gatherings I'd attended. Her living room filled with stories of falling in love by the lake, of childhood hikes through the woods, of days when people looked out for each other. In the corner of the room, next to a stack of photo albums, Eleanor handed me something. A weathered journal that had belonged to Grandpa. Its pages were filled with hand-drawn sketches, poetic musings, and deeply thoughtful notes about the balance of nature. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, almost expecting his voice to echo behind me. That journal was more than memorabilia, it was a message across time, and it told me we were on the right path. Not long after, Karen's indictment hearing arrived. Local news stations lined the courthouse steps. Karen emerged from a sleek sedan surrounded by lawyers. Gone was the confidence, the smirk. Her eyes darted nervously as the weight of the charges: fraud, conspiracy, environmental violations came crashing down. It was a surreal moment, seeing her unravel. A woman who once seemed untouchable, now facing the consequences. When the judge granted a continuance, the message was clear: the law was catching up. Watching the screen go black after the coverage, I felt a sense of closure, not of revenge, but of justice. With Karen's era fading, life in Whispering Pines began to truly bloom. Areas once marked for bulldozers now sprouted new life. A reforestation initiative led by local teens brought color and vitality back to the land. Nature, it seemed, was healing with us. The grand opening of the Community and Conservation Center became our new focus. We set up exhibits on the Whispering Pines Accord, showcasing photos, documents, and even the original contract in a glass display. One evening, while prepping for the ceremony, I caught my reflection in the cabin mirror. I looked older, sure, but there was peace behind my eyes. Hard-won peace. On the morning of the event, the lake shimmered like glass under the rising sun. Volunteers bustled around setting up chairs, banners, and balloons. A hand-painted sign read, Whispering Pines Community and Conservation Center, Grand Opening. Asterisk, as the crowd gathered, young and old, newcomers and lifelong residents, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. My voice trembled at first, but then I found my rhythm. I spoke of the journey, of our shared trials, of Grandpa's dream, of how every pine needle and every gust of wind now reminded me that we had done something worth remembering. Asterisk, Amanda cut the ribbon. Applause erupted. The crowd surged inside, exploring displays and sharing stories. And in a quiet moment, as the celebration waned, I sat beside Eleanor near a mural she had helped inspire. The painting told our story of struggle, resistance, and rebirth. Asterisk, her voice was soft, but strong. Your grandfather would be so proud. Asterisk, I blinked back tears. Because I believed her, because I knew it was true.